Hey, it's so nice to see you. As we prepare for Shavuot, one of the great lessons of Shavuot is that it reflects one of the great blessings of this period of these last months. In that, as the children of Israel sat at the foot of Mount Sinai, as Rashi says, they sat ish echad b'lev echad, as one person with one heart. And I think the ways in which we've been able to come together, our communities have come together, Jewish communities come together, the world has come together in so many ways, has been unprecedented and has provided us with new opportunities to connect and new opportunities to communicate. And this program that we're presenting now is just one example of the new way in which our lives are blessed.
Absolutely. The holiday of Shavuot celebrates the receiving of the Torah. And the Torah, our map, our path, our guide, teaches us that the world in which we can create tomorrow can be better than today. Shavuot is the ultimate holiday of hope. And therefore, we have gathered together a range of different voices from our community, sharing messages of hope. Please, I would like to hear from you a message of hope that you can share with us at this season of Shavuot.
Absolutely. It's such an important idea. And the word in Hebrew for hope is tikvah. Rav Kook teaches that there's another word as well that we use in our tradition to describe the hope, he writes, that beats in the heart of every Jew throughout the generations. And that's the Hebrew word sipia. And it's connected to the phrase in which the Talmud in Shabbat offers when it describes the questions that were asked bis 120 ad 120 after a good long life, when a person is brought to judgment. One of the questions they're asked is, Sipita li Yeshua. Did you hope for? Did you anticipate the redemption? Did you look forward to that moment? And Rav Kook writes that there is a hope that we all have, this kind of passive concept. But then there's tzipia, which is the hope that we work towards. The hope that, as the phrase goes, be the change that you want to see. That's that kind of hope that we look for in terms of redemption. Elie Wiesel told a really extraordinary story about the French novelist and playwright Tristan Bernard, how when he was taken away by the Gestapo in the Holocaust, his wife noticed a slight smile on his face. And she said, how in all moments of life, in this moment, can you be smiling? And he said, because until this moment, I've lived with the emotion of fear that this would happen. But now that it's happened, now I live with hope. And I think that's the message of hope in our tradition, which is that hope is a choice we make. And if we choose hope, then we live lives of hope. And then our lives are made so much better with that sentiment, with that emotion, with that decision to lead lives of hope.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. In the same vein, the word hope, tikvah, as you know, each Hebrew word has a shoresh, a root, which indicates its deeper meaning and significance. The root of tikvah, hope, is the word kav, and kav actually means a line, a rope. What's the connection? A rope and hope. In English, they rhyme. But is there something deeper? And the answer, explained by Rabbi Chaim Lutzato, the Ramchal, is that tikvah is that moment when a person may feel despair, when a person may feel dejected, down and out, and suddenly a moment of hope comes about. It's something they actively have to grab a hold of. And when a rope is lowered down into a place of lowness, a place of being grounded, a person can suddenly pull themselves out of a pit that they find themselves in, into greater and broader vistas. That is what hope is. It's something that we are initially first gifted as a fleeting moment of inspiration, and then we have to work on creating that new opportunity for ourselves, holding tightly onto hope, holding onto that line, allowing us to lift ourselves ever higher and out of the situation we may find ourselves in.
Wow, thank you for that really beautiful message, and inspiring message of hope. And we now have the great pleasure in this Shavuot learning program to hear from spiritual leaders of our Montreal Jewish community, to hear their messages of hope and hear their reflections on this important concept of hope that's so central to our lives. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
To talk about hope today could not be more relevant or more important. We live in times that are certainly challenging, but we Jews, we are experts at hope. There are those historians who claim that we invented the very idea of hope. And we all know this. Every Seder, how do we end? We end by saying, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Our whole history is replete with that optimism for a better future. The greatest emblem, possibly, of Jewish hope is that no matter where we went in the world, from Cochin, India, to Kiev, to Casablanca, to Cleveland, first thing we did upon arriving is build a Jewish school before we built a synagogue. Before we built anything else, we built a school. The school represents our hope for a better future. You know, after the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, the first Friday night, if you can imagine, there was a Kabbalah Shabbat service. They davened Kabbalat Shabbat. And we have a recording of it. Thank God. And at the end of that service, they sang Tikvah, if you can imagine such a thing. Od lo avda tikvatenu. Our hope is not lost, even in Bergen-Belsen. And if you listen to the recording, there's one woman whose voice seems to rise above all the others, a woman named Ceci Einhorn, a survivor who lost everything. And she sang so loud, it's clear she understood. She was singing not just for herself or those around her. She was singing for history. And 64 years later, a Jewish woman in Israel named Oren Aviv stood at a swearing-in ceremony for Israeli officers, watching her son being sworn in. And at the end of that ceremony, they sang Hatikvah. And all she could think about was the voice of her mother singing at Bergen-Belsen. Odlo avda tikvatena, liyot amchavshi ba'altsein, to once again be a free people in our land. We Jews, we've always lived with hope. And to live with hope means to live with joy and optimism and a real sense of purpose. And the knowledge, no matter what challenge we face, we will in fact overcome. No matter what challenge is put before us, we will certainly persevere and not just survive, but flourish and continue to be a remarkably creative force in the history of mankind. That is our hope. Our hopes in the past have been realized. Our hopes for the future will continue to be realized. And we realize that with joy and hope and enormous pride.
Rabbi Nachman of Breslov used to say, friends, do not despair, for a difficult time has come upon us. Joy will yet fill the air. We must not lose our faith in living. Friends, do not despair, for a difficult time has come upon us. Joy will fill the air. Rabbi Nachman מבreslav היה אומר לא להתייאש, כי הגיעה עת קשה, רק לשמוח יש.
Shalom. By and large, humans crave reason and predictability. Sadly, however, organization and certainty are often elusive, forcing us to embrace the unknowable, the unmanageable, and often incomprehensible. Just as we were forced to do so in the case of the tragedy that struck the Lag BaOmer celebrants on Mount Meron 2 weeks ago, leaving 45 innocent people dead. Former Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, defines faith as the courage to believe in the unknown. His definition allows for a dynamic theology in which God is not beyond the world, but rather immanent in it, helping us to recognize that rationality and spirituality are not only compatible, but indeed dependent on one another. When we apply our lives this understanding, what we do is we develop a spiritual fortitude that carries us through the darkest and most painful times, keeping us firm in our beliefs. Jews around the world once again prepared to stand at the foot of Mount Sinai, eagerly awaiting the reenactment of the revelation, the giving of the Torah, our divine gift, our constitution. And we should do so with the understanding, as did the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. Each of us faces a wilderness, an unknown future with expected twists and turns, in which rational decisions may guide us, but it is our faith that has the power to sustain us. The question is, will we let that faith in? Chag Sameach.
Dear friends, when I think about the terrible disaster that happened at Meron, at the kever of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, I think of Rav Shimon's teacher, Rabbi Akiva. The great Rabbi Akiva, during this time period, the 33 days leading up to Lag BaOmer, Rabbi Akiva loses 24,000 of his students. 24,000, let that number sink in. Imagine the terrible pain that Rabbi Akiva was feeling at that time. Losing all of his students, everything that he had built, everything was lost in a very short span of time. But Rabbi Akiva teaches us a very important message of hope. And the Talmud tells us that Rabbi Akiva, after losing all these students, he went L'Rabotenu Shebadarom, to the rabbis in the south, and there he found 5 new students. He knew that he had to continue his legacy, and he knew that he had to continue the teaching of Torah for the next generation. Rabbi Akiva, the ultimate optimist, does not despair. Rabbi Akiva goes to the south, and one of those students that he finds is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I pray that in the merit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the merit of Rabbi Akiva, that we have the strength to know that we as a people, when catastrophe befalls us, we come together. And that's what we've seen in the Jewish world in the last few weeks, how we have come together, no matter who we are and what we are, religious, non-religious, Ashkenaz, Sfarad, everybody has come together. And let the message of Rabbi Akiva, the message of hope, the message that there is a brighter future, it just depends on us, that message be the message for all of Klal Yisrael.
The Book of Ruth is always read on Shavuot, and it's a classic story of rags to riches. Ruth returns to the land of Israel with her mother-in-law Naomi. She is destitute. She is a pauper. She has no history, no connection, no friends in the land. And she's gleaning wheat in the fields amongst the poorest of the poor. But by the end of the book, she's the mother of royalty. She is the great-grandmother of King David himself. There's an interesting twist in this story in that it takes so long for the rags to turn to riches. It's not Ruth herself, it's not her son, it's not her grandson even, it's a great-grandson. And sometimes the story, as our sages instruct us by having us read this story every year on Shavuot, is to see Jewish history in that big picture, not to measure things in weeks, months, not even years, decades. It's sometimes generations that events have to be measured to see their true value. And as we sit here towards the end of a pandemic, to us it feels like it's been forever. It hasn't been forever, and it's going to end soon. And in the same way that Ruth transformed her destiny through a few acts of kindness, as this book teaches us, that's our job now as we get here to the end with the hope of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, to remember always to take care of each other, to look after one another, and through those acts of kindness to achieve our measure of royalty and to see the big picture of where we were, where we are, and where we're going. And that is often measured in large segments of time, despite our being a microwave generation that always want things right away. It's not how it works. We have to have the patience to see them through, to wait them out, and see the royalty that we can become by taking care of each other. Have a great Yontiv, a Chag Sameach to all.
Have you received the Torah yet today? When the people of Israel were about to receive the Torah, the verse states that they arrived at Sinai by Yom Hazeh Ba'u Midbar Sinai. And the language here is unusual. On that day, they arrived at Sinai, except it does not say on that day, by Yom Hahu, rather on this day, by Yom Hazeh. Rashi, quoting the Midrash, notes that the day of arriving at Sinai was not only that day, a day in history. Receiving the Torah is not something that happens once, a long time ago, to other people at another time. Rather, receiving the Torah is something that occurs in the present tense, Bayom Hazeh, on this day and every day. Each day there is something new to discover. A new way that the Torah helps us to navigate our current reality, inspires us in our lives, and guides us in our decisions. In the words of Rashi, the Torah should be to you each day as something new. So, have you received the Torah yet today? Have you pushed yourself to learn something new, to discover that a mitzvah can speak to you in a new way, to see the ways in which the Torah can inform our daily lives? Let the Torah not be a stagnant, historic document, but rather a living, breathing offering, which continues to renew itself as it meets the needs of our particular struggles. Knowing that the Torah has something to offer us today and every day gives us hope and strength that we will always have its guidance, that we will never be alone, and that the Torah can be a resource to us no matter what challenges we face every day of our lives. Chag Shavuot Sameach.
When I was a rabbi in South Africa, I was part of a interfaith group, and I remember that at one of the meetings, a member of that group, I think she was of the Baha'i faith, told a very moving story. She was not white, she was what they called in South African colored, and she described how she was once on a train during the time of apartheid, and someone came up to her and said, "You have to move into another compartment. You can't be here because you're not white." And she turned to him and she said to him, "I'm going to go now, but you're not going to be doing this to people for much longer, because this is wrong. And something this wrong will not happen indefinitely." What she said moved me because her attitude encapsulated the idea of hope. And it's hope that we think about at this time of the year, the Omer, because Rabbi Akiva was the person who lived his life giving expression to hope. 24,000 students died. Can you imagine the sense of devastation, especially as they died because they weren't respecting one another? This was Rabbi Akiva, whose main theme in Judaism was loving your fellow Jew. And yet when they died, Rabbi Akiva picks up the pieces and says, we're going to carry on. He gets together 5 students, and from those 5 students, he builds the future of Judaism. This is what happens to us in our lives. Sometimes our kids, we've got some problems, but we refuse to give up. Our marriages, not going so well, we refuse to give up. Our Judaism, we've got problems with it, we refuse to give up. The pandemic, all the challenges that we've had, sometimes it seems overwhelming. We refuse to give up. That is the message of hope that I learned from that lady and from Rabbi Akiva.
I wear a ring every day that was made in Jerusalem. And on the ring is a line in Hebrew that says, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. And the ring is connected to a story, a legend of the wise King Solomon, who was told that there was a ring that would make a happy person sad if he looked at it, and a sad person happy. And the ring turned out to be the one inscribed with this very line, this too shall pass. And as I've worn this ring over these many months, I've been thinking, of course, of that story. But as we come to the festival of Shavuot, I'm thinking about something different. I'm thinking about how that story, as comforting or as sobering as it can be, is also too passive. And we're not a passive people. So on Shavuot, we tell a different story. We tell a story of standing at Mount Sinai, all the Jewish people, past, present, and future, having the chutzpah to enter into a covenant with God, to make ourselves better, our society better, our world better. And I think of the extraordinary story of Ruth, the ultimate outsider who becomes the ultimate insider, who leaves absolutely everything she knows to follow her mother-in-law, Naomi, and Naomi's God. And so as much as that saying, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass, has its time and its place, right now, as I think of our community, as I think of our place in this world, it seems to me that our role is not to be passive, not to wait for the world to change around us, but to embrace our teaching, our Torah, the chutzpah of being in covenant, of having the ability and the responsibility to make this world a better place. Chag Sameach, everyone.
We hope you have enjoyed this presentation. And with this, we would like to wish everybody a Chag Sameach. You should have a beautiful Shavuot. I would also like to thank all of those who participated in this uplifting, hopeful video. And ultimately, I would like to take a moment to thank the spiritual leadership of our Jewish Montreal community. You have done so much for the entire community during these past 15 months. Everything you do is so deeply appreciated and so keenly felt. Yesher kochachem to all of you.
And as we conclude this program, when we conclude a book of the Torah, the words we say are chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, let us strengthen each other. And the ideas of strength and hope are deeply connected in our tradition. As the verse says in Psalm 27, kaveh el Hashem, kaveh from the word tikvah, hope to God, look to God. Chazak v'ametz libecha, be strong and of good courage in your heart. The kaveh el Hashem, and hope to God. And it's our prayer that these reflections on hope have given strength to you and strength to all members of our community as we prepare to celebrate a joyous and edifying Shavuot. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.